Speaking of which, speaking of which, Iran, in this case, Pezeshkian. So he gives a speech right here. So he makes the point that the US and the threats that are coming out of the US, and again, this is in a different language, so it's no point in me. All of my audio is coming out staticky, and I can't tell why. And I can't do anything about it while the show is running. You can't hear it, I hear it, and it's annoying the hell out of me. Put it to the side. That means when Dan Kovalik comes on, he's also going to be static. I don't know how to fix that. All right. Fair enough. If you can't hear it, I'll just bear it. So Pezeshkian is effectively saying Trump delivered a letter. And in that letter, Trump says something to the effect that it will be swift and direct action if you do not come to an agreement with me. Now, Pezeshkian is pointing out, look, we are not going to negotiate with you under these terms. The Ayatollah has ruled that we are not going to negotiate with you under these terms. However, we will negotiate indirectly. Now, is there a great difference between those things? I suppose optically, yes. In reality, no. But whatever. He's saying we will negotiate behind the scenes through a third party actor. Now, what does that mean in the context of negotiations? Now, this is a bit rich since Donald Trump was the one that pulled out of the JCPOA because he didn't like the stain of Obama getting that deal. That deal was working. Iran stayed with the deal for another year. Fast forward, Trump gets back in office. Joe Biden does not go back to the deal. And the Ayatollah is like, why are we going to negotiate with somebody who pulled out of the last deal and is an unreliable actor in and of itself? And he has a point, right? Trump pulled out the JCPOA. Donald Trump comes in, makes a deal with Hamas and Israel. He immediately allows Israel to violate that deal all the way through, and not just violate that deal all the way through, opening up a killing campaign once again on the Palestinians, on the Lebanese. Trump says nothing about it. He doesn't bring up the reporting about human shields, that apparently Israel keeps its own human shields. Right here. This is disturbing, to say the least. Not this one. This one. In Gaza, almost every IDF platoon keeps a human shield, sub-army of Palestinian slaves. So all of that reporting that was coming out saying, oh my God, Hamas and human shields. Hamas has human shields. I've seen videos of them walking a person in front of a tank with the idea that if anybody shoots, you're going to kill a Palestinian. Okay, that's a human shield. That is literally a human shield. The difference is Hamas is an open-air ghetto. So where do you expect them to fight? Outside of the open-air ghetto that you effectively kept them in? The IDF, however, has a choice. And they're making that choice using human beings as shields because they don't really give a shit about the lives of Palestinians, as shown by what they're doing right now. In fact, I would go further. Every accusation that Israel has made about Hamas, especially on October 7th, they themselves do as bases of operation. The gang rapes that took place in the prisons, or for that matter, the reporting on the rapes that Israel has been doing to Palestinians. Okay, well, that's a clear issue. Will US media report it? Rarely. Will Trump bring it up? Never. Will this administration? Never. However, they will point to things that they say Hamas is effectively doing. So Israel continuously violates a deal. The US administration does nothing about it. So if you are Iran and you're looking at this, why would you trust anything that comes out of this administration or the previous administration? Why would you? How could you make a deal with somebody this radically untrustworthy, this flagrantly grotesque figure? How could you do that? Especially when you know that the Zionists have given hundreds of millions of dollars to Trump and with Democrats and Republicans across the board that is influencing their behavior in the political space. That instead of having an American first policy, you have an Israel first policy, especially on everything in association with Israel, meaning Iran, Yemen, Gaza, the West Bank, where they know as a flat fact that the Trump administration would allow them to do anything. I'll put that in context, right? Then Trump has filled them with weapons, and under the guise of a ceasefire deal, filled them with weapons so they can renew their operations. This is while looking the Muslim community in the face and saying, hey, I'm going to end wars, not start wars. Right here. This came up, and this is now coming more into context. And Dan Kovalik is going to be on the show to discuss this in a moment. But right here, one of the most horrifying nights, the Israel army killed nearly 300 women and children. 300 women and children. Follow that up with this. The airstrikes that hit Gaza tonight were unlike anything witnessed since the beginning of the war. The attacks were unusually intense, and the bombs dropped by Israel warplanes caused massive destruction and terrifying explosions that could be heard miles away. All right. Fast forward to, I think, this right here. We will see the general security in Gaza Strip and will allow realization of Trump's plan for voluntary migration. This is the plan. We're not hiding this, and we're ready to discuss it at any time. Self-deportation, voluntary migration. What he's effectively talking about is we are going to create so much chaos, havoc, destruction. We're going to kill so many people that, no, we are not going to force you to leave. You're going to want to leave to not die, which means that murder is the issue. Murder is the game plan. For the longest time, I kept asking myself, what do they expect? I mean, for God's sake, you have them in an open air ghetto. What do you expect them to do? You're shuffling them to and fro. You're blowing up hospitals. You've destroyed every building in the location, like 80%. What is the point? Either you're going to kill them all, or you're going to expel them all. And Netanyahu is saying the quiet part aloud. We want you to leave on your own accord or die. It's one or the other. We've decided this. The Trump administration is going to allow us to do this. This is the plan. Leave or die. That is astonishing. And the Trump administration is standing by and not just allowing it, also approving of it. I want to bring in my guests. We're joined with Dan Kovalik. Dan Kovalik. He is an American human rights, labor rights lawyer and political activist. He previously taught at International Human Rights at the University of Pittsburgh. Dan, my man, how are you doing this morning? You doing okay?
I'm great. How are you, my friend?
I am doing okay. My system is screwing up and I'm hearing static and everything that I play, but the audience says they hear you just fine. And so I'm going to run with that. I'm happy to have you, especially today on these subjects. I was going through a little bit before I brought you in on some of the things that Donald Trump was doing. Effectively, Netanyahu was saying, hey, self-deport. And for the longest time, I kept asking, what is the point? Like, you're just killing people wantonly. What is the issue with this? Like, it's one thing to have a military objective where you're trying to accomplish something like I'm doing X and Y because I want to accomplish this objective. And I kept asking, okay, well, what is the objective? Okay, well, he just said the quiet part out loud. We're destroying all of the buildings, all of the hospitals. We're making it completely uninhabitable. And we're doing it because we want you to leave on your own accord or stay and die. It's one or the other. And the Trump administration, who claims to have a deal, has just filled them with weapons to allow them to continue to do this and stands by and says nothing about it, short of they're going to get the deal done. Trump gave a speech, and I want to play this. I want to get your take on this.
Okay.
And I want to give you Tulsi Gabbard's take also after you hear part of the speech, that you are going to rip your camera off the wall, or wherever your camera, you're going to rip it off the wall. This is Trump. Listen to what he says here.
Relentless diplomacy to forge a lasting peace in the Middle East. building on the historic Abraham Accords, which everybody said would be impossible. And now we're going to start filling them out because, as you know, Biden did nothing to fill them out. He did absolutely. We had the 4 great countries, and nothing happened, despite the importance of the Abraham Accords. But I have a feeling it's going to fill out very quickly. People are talking already about it. They should have had them long ago. It should have been done. We're rapidly defeating inflation by reducing energy costs and even slashing the price of eggs. Every day we're keeping our promises to the Muslim community. My administration is engaged in relentless diplomacy to forge a lasting peace in the Middle East.
Relentless diplomacy. Tulsi Gabbard, on top of that speech, says Donald Trump is a man of peace. And mind you, she's saying this as he is bombing Yemen and is provoking a war with Iran, or at the very least threatening Iran.
Yes.
What the hell? And by the way, saying this as he allows Israel to flagrantly violate the ceasefire agreement that they effectively had, quote unquote, and kill wantonly hundreds. I mean, for God's sake, this post came out showing the number of people that they slaughtered just in one night, all of which, or the majority of which, were women and children. Trump is not going to say anything about it. He's not going to say anything.
Haaretz, the Israeli paper, said in one night Israel killed 200 children, which was the biggest child massacre in Israel's history, which is saying something. No, this is insane. And by the way, the idea of a voluntary exodus from Gaza, how is it voluntary if you're forced to do it at literally gunpoint or bomb point? That there's nothing voluntary about that, right? It's like I go into your house again with a gun and say you leave and I'm going to take your house or I'll shoot you. That's not voluntary if you leave. That's called coercion. It's called maximum coercion. It's terrible what's happening. And the latest I hear is that Trump is trying to threaten Egypt that the U.S. will cut off all aid to Egypt unless they take in the Palestinians, and we'll see. I mean, but that was threatened before. Biden threatened it. I mean, we do need to point out this was Biden's plan too. It didn't work because Egypt didn't agree to it. Egypt's now in a tough spot. I mean, put aside the aid, which is very important to them, but also they're going to have to, look at all these people being murdered and have to decide whether they're going to save them essentially or not, right? I mean, but if they do save them by bringing them into Egypt, they're parties to an ethnic cleansing. They've been put into a very difficult moral position, and it's terrible. And again, I mean, what they're doing, they're using these bunker bombs to bomb tent villages. I mean, it's just absurd. And someone put out a interesting post I thought was very good. They said, during the existence of apartheid South Africa, there was the Soweto massacre in which the apartheid regime killed 69 black South Africans. And the world was just utterly shocked by this, which they should have been, of course. But now Israel's killing 70 people a day or more in Gaza and no one cares. I mean, it really is just something like, where has the morality gone? Where has the legality gone? It's gone totally out the window. What we found completely unacceptable before is a daily occurrence that is just ho-hum for people. And there will be no peace. Let me be very clear. There will be no peace in the Middle East if they get away with this. This is going to lead to, you're already seeing massive protests in Turkey. I think governments are going to fall. And the governments that replace them are going to be very militant and very much against Israel.
You think governments are going to fall?
I do think that.
Up to this point, those as Mark calls them, quisling governments have stood by and just watched. I mean, and I got to be honest with you, these last few years have been eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
Um, eye-opening in a way that I think my mom is disturbed by, if I'm being honest. I've always said there's no such thing as international law. I've always said that morality is only a weapon insofar as people accept it to be. Meaning, doing something immoral God is not going to get involved, right? A person can walk into a bakery, shoot somebody in the face, nobody gets involved. Maybe the cops take the guy away, but ultimately nobody stops that act from taking place. And if you're talking about from the level of countries, okay, the only thing that stops a country from doing something is another country. And if the countries say, okay, we don't want to get involved. We don't want to expend blood and treasure. We don't want to get into a war. We don't want to use our economic might because something else might happen to us negative. Then the act is allowed. Doesn't matter if it's moral, doesn't matter if it's legal, doesn't matter if it's ethical. The act takes place. And you can watch what's happening and in some way realize how the German genocide would take place, where
Yes.
people would stand by. You would have institutions that not do their jobs. So the ICC, yeah, okay, that's nice. We hear you. But again, the ICC is just a court. And a court doesn't have a military, it just has a court. And so Israel pursues its objectives with the blessings of America and with the inability of all of these governments, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, etc., who's supposed to be defenders of Muslims, especially or defenders of Arabs. And they do squat as these people get slaughtered and pushed out in the most grotesque of ways by a colonizing force. If there was a video camera during the time that America was expanding, it would probably look a lot like this.
Yes, it would. Yeah.
The difference is we can watch it.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the very act of watching it, I don't want to say sanitizes it, but it makes us like, what's the word I'm looking for? It makes us like jaded to it. It's like you realize,
Desensitized.
yeah, desensitized to it. It's like you see children getting killed, you see people getting killed, and you realize, all right, God doesn't care. Nobody gets involved. If human beings don't act, nothing happens. In which case, this gets allowed. It is disturbing. I don't know where this goes, right? Like, I don't know if they're pushed out into Syria. I don't know if they're pushed out into Egypt at some point. I don't know if they get pushed out into Sinai. But it's very clear that Israel's objective is we want these people to leave. And we want to create a situation so unlivable on the ground that they self-deport. That is astonishing.
It's astonishing. Yeah, I mean, when you think about the Nakba, which took place in 1948, in which they think about 750,000 Palestinians were displaced, you're talking
Yep.
now more than double that, at 2 million or so. And again, as you mentioned, there weren't video cameras back then. It happened largely in secret, at least as far as the Western world was concerned. But as you say, no one could claim they don't know what's happening now in Gaza. And by the way, I listened to this guy Justin Podor. I've known him for quite a while. He's very good. He's got a podcast, and what he says quite a bit. I believe he's Palestinian, if I'm not mistaken. In any case, what he says, and I think it's pretty brilliant, though disturbing. He said, "Look, even if they push the Palestinians into the Sinai, that's not the end of this. The Israelis," he says, "people think the Israelis just want to get rid of the Palestinians." He says, "That's not true." He says, "They are obsessed with the Palestinians. They will continue to haunt the Palestinians, even in the Sinai. They will continue to try to lord over them. They will continue to try to be the ones to determine how much food and water they get." And and that's absolutely true. I'm absolutely certain that that's true. That is to say, none of this ends, even if they're pushed out into the Sinai. The same type of repression, The same type of concentration camp-like conditions will exist in the Sinai. You can be guaranteed of that. So again, this is just not a solution. This is more like the final solution of of Nazi Germany. I mean, this is a genocide. And as you say, the world's allowing it to happen. And the Palestinians know it. I mean, they know that the world has turned their backs on them, with the exception of the Yemenis at this point. And if you don't mind me, I'm also dealing now with what's happening in Syria. I woke up this morning and similar things happening in Syria, and very few people know this. That there's a genocide happening in Syria against the Alawites in particular, Christians too, but Alawites more so. The latest estimate I saw in Syria, listen to this, is 50,000 people killed in the last few weeks. 50,000. And women are being kidnapped, and they're being brought to Idlib, where they're being sexually enslaved. And you're not even hearing about this, but the same question is posed to me directly by my Alawite friends there. Why isn't anyone doing anything about this?
By the way, it's worse than that, because you're getting people like Annalena Baerbock going into Syria to normalize al-Jilani, or you're getting these other governments trying to get rid of sanctions on Syria to normalize, quote unquote, this new Syrian government that they claim is this revolutionary government for the people, as they go door to door and slaughter Christians, Alawites, and pretty much any other
They're
minority.
slaughtering
Sure.
entire families. And the only thing that's changed in the last days is that they're not videotaping themselves doing it. The HTS government, such as it is, their only rule that they prescribed was do what you want, but don't keep videotaping yourself doing it. It's bad for business. So now they're just doing it without the videotapes.
See, I prefer them to videotape.
Yeah, well, I agree.
Because videotaping is fascinating to me. Like it's a social media culture, right?
Well,
Even
and
to
at
the
least
point
there's
of
proof
terrorists.
of what's happening. Yeah.
Well, but for them to videotape it, like nobody videotapes themselves taking a dump, right? Very rarely. It would be weird if somebody did that. People videotape things that they are proud of, that they think are their best moments. And so when they're videotaping themselves committing an atrocity, in their minds, this is fine.
Yeah, they are
God
proud
permits
of
it.
it. Yeah, you're right. They're
Yeah,
proud of
they're
it.
proud of it. It's
This is being done out of a bizarre quasi-religious, zealotry. And I say quasi because no one really believes this is a legitimate form of Islam or religion. This is more of a almost satanic cult that these folks have. Um, but they are proud of it. They are proud of it, and it's unbelievable. And again, the same question is posed: where's the cavalry? And the cavalry ain't coming. That's the truth. And it ain't coming to Gaza, and it's not coming to Syria, and that's very troubling.
I will tell you,
And
Dan,
yeah,
this gives me a certain view of the world
yeah.
that
No,
is
it's a
far
very
darker.
dark view. It's a very dark view, and it's a very we're moving backwards. I mean, when you look again, particularly at this HTS Al Qaeda group that's running Syria, I mean, you're talking about medieval. These are medievalists, and that's what we've brought to Syria. And again, with Israel and their genocide in Gaza, after World War II, the saying was
Never again.
no more, and yet here it is, 21st century. And and as you say, can you imagine that you'd be watching videotapes of this happening and seeing the world utterly standing by? It's really something. It's a dark time. We live in very dark times. That's all I can say.
Why do you think the Muslim governments are allowing, or Muslim Arab, I should say, allowing this to take place in this way? Is it just they're being paid by the US? Is it they just don't want to get involved? Saudi Arabia is like the third most, like spends third most on the military, something like that. I think it's like third or fourth. How on earth does this take place without any political opposition to it? I mean, nobody's saying go to war, but like you said, cut off gas,
Yeah, cut off
economic
oil.
sanctions. They
Yeah.
don't do any of this stuff.
Yeah, 1973, OPEC cut off oil to the world, to stop Israel, and it worked. And that could be done right now. So, as you say, the question is why? I think it was a different time. I think you had more politically progressive, even if they weren't. They were at least more nationalistic governments in power in some of these countries. I believe Nasser was still in power in Egypt. Of course, he was a nationalist. And of course, the West worked very hard to get rid of Nasser and others like him and
Try to
replace them with
overthrow
these quislings that you had to talk about.
them.
And they did ultimately. You had Anwar Sadat become the president of Egypt, and it's been fairly reactionary since then. There was that Arab Spring Revolution, which changed things a bit. But then the U.S. came in again and got rid of the Muslim Brotherhood government and put in power Sisi. And so that put the end to that. So you're back to pretty much what was before the Mubarak government, the Sadat government, these quislings. And, countries like Egypt, like Jordan, depend on U.S. aid for their very existence. And so the U.S. has a lot of leverage over them. Saudi Arabia, I mean, they really, if they wanted to, they have the ability to do something serious. Turkey does. Why they don't, I guess it's their own interest of state that they feel, they don't want to put themselves out to do it, that they do feel they don't want to upset the United States and the West. But it's completely inexcusable, but I'm only trying to say why they may have made that decision, but um, you know, yeah, I'm speechless in a way. I mean, again, I've never seen times like this. I mean, again, if you look at South Africa, for example, in the apartheid South Africa, the world united against it, with the exception of the U.S. and Israel, of course, who are always outliers on this stuff. But the rest of the world was pretty good in isolating South Africa, cutting off trade. You even had the Cubans, with the backing of the Soviet Union, actually fighting in Southern Africa in a way that changed the balance of forces there. That's a story that a lot of people don't know about.
Mhm.
Mandela, I'll just say this because people probably don't know this. Mandela said the first person he visited when he was freed was Fidel Castro in Cuba, and he said that Cuba helped liberate South Africa through military means. Very few people know this. Because again, it embarrasses the West. But here's the point: you did have a resistance to it, economic, military, otherwise, political. And the resistance to the apartheid Israel and the genocide in Gaza is much more muted. Do have these street protests. You do have BDS, but you don't have the level of international consensus of doing something to stop this.
Mhm. It's just, it just, if I was Arab, I would think to myself, my life is worth squat, according to
Well,
the
certainly
world.
the Palestinians feel that way, and I think they feel like even the Arab world doesn't really care about them. And I think that's sadly a fair conclusion to draw from all of this.
There will be consequences.
There
I
will be a
there,
reckoning. Yes,
there's
there will be a
always
reckoning.
a reckoning. I mean,
Yes.
it never fails. Give it 20 years, give it 30 years. There will be a reckoning. This will not be forgotten. They will remember exactly how the world saw this, and there will be consequences. Mark my words. Another story I want to get to has to do with universities in the United States. you were a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. I hope I got that right.
Yes.
Um, Donald Trump has started to put the screws to various universities on the issue of anybody who's criticizing either America or Israel, and has decided to revoke visas, to kick people out the country. And the universities themselves have bent the knee on these issues. And in fact, to give one specific one that I thought was completely grotesque, if I can find the link again, right here. So this is coming out of, what school is this? So faculty and staff at Johns Hopkins, by the way, a crappy hospital. I know people say it's a good hospital. I was at Johns
Yeah, it's
Hopkins.
famous.
I
Yeah,
went for an
it's
entire week
considered like,
without them
yeah,
feeding
the
me.
gold standard. Yeah.
Supposedly the gold standard, unless you are a patient there. I had a stroke. I lost half an eyesight of my eye. Johns Hopkins brought me there. The best person, believe it or not, was the ophthalmologist. And I learned everything that I was going to learn while I was there in the first few hours downstairs with the ophthalmologist. They put me in the room, and for a week, they forget to feed me. And when I pointed out to the nurse, she was like, "Oh my God, why didn't you tell me?" It's like, "Why do I need to tell you that?" At a certain point, I just got curious on how long they would go. And so I was like, "All right, screw it. Let's see how long they go without realizing they don't bring lunch." Serenity, serenity. I feel some way about it. But whatever. Right here, faculty and staff at Johns Hopkins were told to intervene, not to intervene if ICE agents come to the campus looking for to detain community members. Employees were also told not to help, leave, or hide if they were being sought by federal agents. So effectively, look, if ICE comes to arrest members of your fellow staff, people that you know, people that you've worked with, maybe even for years, don't try to hide them. Don't try to help them. Don't try to get them out of the hospital. Don't do anything in their stead. Just let them take them. Just stand by and watch Bob, Raul, whoever get taken. How cowardly can you
Yes.
be? You are
Well,
dealing with
yeah.
a grotesque president who is pushing the limits of presidential power, to put it mildly. And in some cases, deporting people to countries they don't even belong to. And in other cases, revoking visas in order to do so. Mind you, all of this stuff is going to get challenged in the courts. And their response is, despite the fact that this is most likely illegal, don't help, don't do anything, don't get involved. It reminds me of Nazi Germany, where somebody comes in order to take somebody away, and it's like, well, I'm not going to help that person. I'm not going to get involved in this. Okay, maybe you should get involved. Like, I find that to be radically cowardly. What I would want John Hopkins to say is, hey, help these people, help them leave, help them exit. We're not going to acquiesce to this. It's terrifying to me that these institutions bow their heads the moment that a president gets in and starts exerting presidential authority in a way that honestly it shouldn't be exerted, and frankly illegal, without due process. And their response is, let him do what he will. Don't
Yeah,
get
they're bending
involved.
the knee. And you saw is it Pomona University is giving over the student disciplinary records to the federal government so they can rifle through them and see who they want to deport or arrest or whatnot. Of course, Columbia University has bent the knee as well. That's my alma mater as well. I went to Columbia Law School. It is shocking. And again, you would think the academy might be a place that where people could find sanctuary, right?
Yes,
And
you would think.
instead, yeah, uh, they're being left out to dry. They're being sacrificed. And again, for money because they're afraid federal funding's going to be cut off. But okay, better that than you lose your soul. But that's what they're sacrificing here. You mentioned people being sent to countries they're not from. Did you see the story of the young man? So they sent a bunch of people to El Salvador that they claimed, at least some of them, a lot of them they claimed were Venezuelan gang members, and they claimed they could tell from their tattoos. One young man they sent there, turned out his tattoo was an autism awareness tattoo. And now he's being sent to a prison in El Salvador where he will be undoubtedly tortured. I mean, these are some of the roughest prisons in the world. It's sickening. I mean, it really is sickening what's happening. It's outrageous. And, if citizens of the U.S. think they're not going to be caught up in this, they're sorely mistaken. I think about this myself. I mean, again, not about me personally, but, think about it. If you go walking down the street to buy a loaf of bread or whatever, and, if the ICE came and said, we want to see your papers, what papers would you have on you? Like, how could you prove you're a citizen? How could I prove I'm a citizen? Like, you know, um, they're shooting first and asking questions later, right? It's a dangerous time. America, as we know it, is dying, and unless there is a real groundswell of opposition to this, we're going to be
But,
losing
the,
more and more of our rights.
but there doesn't seem to be. There's no political coalition against it.
No,
And
the
you go,
Democrats are laying down. They're doing nothing. Yes.
and from an institution standpoint, meaning colleges, etc., bowing heads.
Yeah.
Like this is like God, man. I always used to think democracy was one of those things that was fickle, if that makes sense. Like it was always balanced on the head of a pin. And you can see what happens when it tips. And there is no focus on maintaining the governmental structure in the way that it is. Like the moment that institutions fall apart, they fall apart. And that's all we got, institutions, right? That's the thing that makes this stuff work. And it doesn't seem that those things work well. And especially when you get a president in that pushes and pushes. And I'm just going to do this. And yeah, you get it held up in courts. But what if you just blow up the courts? What if you just,
Which
like,
he
in the
is
same
doing.
way,
Yeah.
yeah, in the same way you blow off, like you said, any notion of morality, any notion of ethics, where the ICC is just a fig leaf that goes after African dictators. They don't, the notion that you don't go after the United States for the Iraq War and Afghanistan is outrageous. And yet you're going to go after Duterte in the Philippines. Okay, give me a break, right? These things don't seem to be real. Or at the very least, they don't do what they say they're supposed to do. And now you have a president who's like, screw it. Let's see how far I can push it. It's just, I don't know. It's just outrageous. From your point of view, Trump is talking about a third term. If you can blow off other institutions, can you ignore the Constitution in this way? I'm doubtful. And maybe this is him, like they said, flooding the zone. But give me your take on this. Do you think there's going to be a backlash to the way that Trump is behaving in this? Meaning, do you think that there's going to be some political coalition that rises up as he pushes further and further and further just to see how far you can actually go? And there's going to be something that comes up that believes in America that says, no mas, no more. We're done.
I think so. What's going to get him, in truth, is the economy. I think the economy is going to take a bad turn. And in the end, that's what, in the end, it's that bread and butter issue that people react to, right? If he can't keep people's economic situation in decent shape, and I don't think he can, and I think some of his policies are undermining everyone's
Yeah.
economic well-being, that's when you're going to see a backlash, right? I mean, as long as people are doing well, most people are doing sort of well, they'll tolerate a lot. But once, there is great economic dislocation, and sadly, I think that day's coming, and a lot of experts are saying it's coming, then all bets are off. And I think talk about a third term goes out the window because people are going to say, you promised us cheap eggs. When they can't buy their cheap eggs, that's when there's going to be a backlash. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I think that time will come sooner rather than later, and then there will be a major realignment in American political life, I think.
You might be right. See, my hope was that with Trump being elected, it would smash the Democratic Party, smash it into bits. And it has. For all intents and purposes, I mean, they organized themselves entirely around beating Trump, and then they lost to Trump, and they had nothing else backing them, in which case you have, like, these guys just crumbles on the floor, right? I was hoping that when they will reorganize into something that was worth the damn,
Right.
that actually was pushing for policy, that gained the mission. Didn't, because I always say they lost the mission, that would gain this reinvigorated idea of, okay, we got this wrong. You lost the maniac. We need to represent something in order to move forward. What I suspect is going to happen, though, is they're going to say, Orange Man bad. He crashed the economy. Vote us back in. No, we don't represent anything, but vote us back in anyway. And the American public is going to say the economy sucks. We need to go to the next party. And they slash back to Democrats who own and represent nothing. God, there's no magical door, man. There's no magical door. Daniel, thank you for this. I always appreciate these conversations, by the way. You are always welcome on this channel.
I appreciate it. I love your show. I enjoy your company, and we'll do it again.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Daniel Kovalik, he is an American human rights, labor rights lawyer and political activist. He previously taught international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. By the way, Daniel, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Daniel M. Kovalik, and you can find my books. I have one out now, The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters, Why You Should Care. You can get that on Amazon or go to my publisher, skyhorsepublishing.com.
Oh, fantastic. Check him out. The man is brilliant. Thank you for this, Daniel. I really appreciate it.
You.
Have a good one.
Appreciate you. Take care.